This plant has been prescribed for insomnia, epilepsy, hysteria, the plague, and shell shock. Ancient Greeks named it after the sound you make when you smell something disgusting. Medieval Swedes tucked it into wedding clothes to ward off the envy of elves, and cats, when they encounter it, lose what little dignity they normally have. This is valerian, and it has been one of the most consistently used medicinal plants in human history for over 2,500 years, which is either a testament to its effectiveness or to the stubbornness of tradition, depending on who you ask.
Valerian grows tall, up to 1.5 meters, sometimes taller, with clusters of small pale pink flowers that smell quite pleasant when the plant is alive and in bloom.
The secret is underground. The roots, when dried, produce one of the most distinctive and divisive smells in the plant kingdom, something between old socks, strong cheese, and something else that's difficult to name politely. The ancient Greeks had a word for it, foo, just that, an exclamation of disgust, written down in their botanical texts as the plant's official name, which tells you that ancient botanists had a sense of humor. And yet these same Greeks were among its most enthusiastic advocates. Hippocrates and Dioscorides prescribed it as a sleep aid as far back as the 5th century BC, which means that for as long as we have written medical records, someone has been recommending valerian for insomnia. Later physicians extended its uses to digestive complaints, liver problems, menstrual disorders, chest inflammation, and poor eyesight, until by the Middle Ages, it had accumulated enough indications to earn a new name altogether: all heal. Galen, physician to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, was among those who prescribed it for insomnia, which adds a certain charm to the image of the most powerful man in the Roman Empire lying awake at night and being handed something that smelled like unwashed feet. The Middle Ages took valerian somewhere considerably stranger. Nordic peoples hung it above their doors as protection against evil spirits. The logic presumably being that the smell alone would deter anything supernatural from entering. There was also a belief that if a hanging bunch of valerian moved in a still room, a witch or ghost had just walked in, which meant that a draughty house could keep an entire household in a state of permanent supernatural anxiety. In medieval Sweden, brides tucked valerian into the wedding clothes of the groom, specifically to ward off the envy of elves, because Scandinavian elves were apparently known to resent human happiness and needed to be discouraged from attending ceremonies. The fact that this required the groom to spend his wedding day smelling of dried root seems not to have been considered a significant problem. Victorian women reportedly wore sprigs of it to attract male attention, which raises the obvious question of whether the men being attracted were responding to the plant's supposed romantic properties or simply investigating an unusual smell. History does not always provide the context we need. What connected all of these uses was that valerian occupied the particular medieval space where medicine and magic had not yet been separated, where a plant could simultaneously function as a genuine sedative, a ward against supernatural forces, and an ingredient in love spells. The smell that sent some people out of the room was, apparently, deeply compelling to others. No example illustrates this more dramatically than what happens when a cat encounters it. Cats regard most human behavior with indifference, and most human food with contempt. Valerian root produces in them a reaction that is difficult to describe without resorting to the word unhinged. When cats encounter valerian, they become hyperactive, rolling, rubbing, and drooling in a way that closely resembles the response to catnip, though the two plants work through completely different compounds. The active ingredient that triggers this reaction is a compound called actinidine, which stimulates the cat's olfactory system in a similar way to the nepentolactone found in catnip. One theory holds that valeric acid in the root is chemically reminiscent of the pheromones produced by cats in heat, which would explain both the intensity of the reaction and the fact that kittens that haven't yet reached sexual maturity don't respond to it at all. The same smell that the ancient Greeks immortalized as an exclamation of disgust is experienced by cats as approximately the most interesting thing that has ever happened to them. It's a useful reminder that the boundary between repellent and irresistible is not always where we expect to find it. By the early 20th century, valerian had been narrowed down from a cure for everything to a recognized sedative. something prescribed specifically for nerves, anxiety, and sleeplessness. And then the First World War began, and the need for something to calm destroyed nerves became urgent on an industrial scale. German soldiers suffering from shell shock were treated with valerian alongside rest and food, which reflects both the compassion and the limitations of military psychiatry in 1914. Shell shock produced symptoms that the medical establishment had almost no framework for. Men who couldn't speak or walk, who shook without stopping, who had violent nightmares and saw things that weren't there, with no physical wound that could account for any of it. The British Army's official position was that these men were displaying cowardice, and more than 150 soldiers were executed for it. German military medicine, whatever its other failings, was at least giving them valerian and a few days in a bed. During the Second World War, the same remedy appeared again, this time among civilians in Britain who were spending nights in bomb shelters, listening to the city above them being taken apart. A plant that Galen had prescribed to help a Roman emperor sleep was being used 2,000 years later to get ordinary people through aerial bombardment. Whether it worked well enough to matter is impossible to say with certainty, but it was what was available, and people reached for it. Which brings us to the question that has followed valerian through every century of its history. Does it actually work? The honest answer is that the evidence is messier than anyone would like. The compounds in valerian root interact with GABA receptors in the brain, the same receptors that pharmaceutical tranquilizers like Valium act on. So the mechanism is pharmacologically plausible. But clinical trials comparing valerian to placebo have produced inconsistent results, with some studies showing clear benefit and others showing none. And the variability between different preparations makes any direct comparison difficult. This leaves scientists in the unusual position of trying to formally prove something that millions of people across dozens of centuries have already decided for themselves. And the fact that valerian remains available in every pharmacy in Europe long after the development of pharmaceutical sleep aids and benzodiazepines and the entire apparatus of modern psychiatry suggests that the ancient Greek physicians who first prescribed it for insomnia were at minimum not entirely mistaken. For 2,500 years, valerian has been prescribed for insomnia, used in wedding rituals, incorporated into love spells, administered to shell-shocked soldiers in the trenches of France, and reduced domestic cats across the world to a state of complete undignified ecstasy. All of this from a plant that grows wild along riverbanks and meadow edges, flowers quietly in early summer, and produces a root that smells, depending on your perspective, like something medicinal and ancient, or like something that needs to be thrown away immediately. Valerian doesn't particularly care which perspective you hold. It has been here for a very long time, and it will keep growing long after the debate about whether it works has been definitively settled, if it ever is.